All right, hopefully everybody's in the right place. So where's the fire? This is not real fire, but fire drills that we go through. So we'll talk a bit about how to deal with disasters when you have websites. My name is Kristen, and I've been doing Drupal for a long time, since 2004, and other projects, web projects in Java before that. In Perl and CGI before that, so I've been around for a while. Some information here if you want to get a hold of me. So I'm going to turn the tables here for a minute and see who's in the house. Who here considers themselves a newbie, maybe just been doing Drupal stuff for the last year or so? So, oh, great, awesome, I'm glad you're here. So we got a few of those. More intermediate, maybe 2 or 3 years of Drupal, oh, quite a few. Veteran, been doing this for a long time. Wow, a lot of you. Great, so maybe you can throw in some of your own tips and tricks as well. Who's more on the site building side, more on the clicking and that kind of thing? Not a few, not a lot though. Okay. Project management, you have to talk to the client. Okay, a few of you. Theming, any themers in the house? A little bit. More on the development side, doing lots of development, back-end, a lot more of, okay, so that's probably the right audience. Who does everything? Oh, wow, okay, that is definitely the right audience. Okay, cool. All right, so what are some website disasters that might happen? And I'm going to turn the tables and I'll repeat the answer because the audio recording can't hear everybody else, but just throw out some things. What can go wrong? White screen. You go to the site and there's nothing there. Oh, say white screen of death. Anything else? Just throw out some things. 504. So that's a response code saying, something's gone wrong, some network connection or whatever. Sorry? PDO exception. Oh, yeah, I love those. Those are awesome. All right. You get hacked, right? Okay, so there's lots of things that can happen. We'll talk about some of those. Site may be hard down, right? Maybe the site's just really slow. Maybe some files got deleted and you don't know why. Or some code got deleted and you don't know why. Maybe the database got deleted. That would be pretty bad. Maybe just some of the infrastructure's not working, some emails aren't working, or some feature. Some third-party things are going on. So there's a lot of things that can happen, and so when we're talking about, the kind of disasters and fires that we're fighting, it's not always just the site's hard down. There might be a whole bunch of things that are going on. So now, what are some causes of these things? Again, I'm going to turn the tables and see if anyone has any answers for that. Just throw out some things. Sorry? Permissions issues, so file permissions. Maybe people can't see the files because someone messed up the file permissions. Any other ideas? Sorry? Traffic spike, yes, exactly. All of a sudden you've been Reddited or /dotted. I don't know if they're so popular anymore, but back in the day. Active development on live. Ooh, don't do that. Yeah, exactly. Someone maybe fat-fingered something on there. Yeah, that wasn't a good thing. Anything else?
Varnish trouble.
Varnish, okay. Who's got some weird caching thing going on? Anyone want to throw anything else out? Committing code without testing it. Yeah, not so good. All right, so we've got some good things here. So we talked about some of these things. We had a bump in traffic. That could be good traffic. Yay, we're on the New York Times. That could be not so good traffic. We're getting some hackers trying to, take down the site. Maybe, there's CDN problems. Maybe we're using Cloudflare or Fastly, and there's some problem with them. Maybe there's actually hosting infrastructure problems, something with the routers or, the database servers or who knows what, right? All sorts of stuff. Third-party services that we're using in order to support the site. Maybe we don't handle those gracefully when they're not available, and so we're seeing problems that maybe we shouldn't see. The application itself, maybe we committed code that we shouldn't have committed because we forgot to test it. Maybe we made this big, huge cron job, and it's running every 15 minutes, and it's just hanging the site. So there's all sorts of things that can happen there. And then there's the fat finger. We did something on live we shouldn't have. We did something with permissions we shouldn't have. We deleted files and we shouldn't have. So, so many things that could happen, and we just have to be aware that, and, it's okay, people make mistakes, it's not time to be pointing fingers. Sometimes you're going to do it yourself, and, that's going to happen. So today we'll talk a bit about how do we handle these things. We're talking a bit about planning, monitoring, diagnostics, support, recovery, and prevention. Prevention is key. You're not going to prevent everything, but you're going to try to at least prevent the things you can prevent. So the first thing is try not to panic. But this one's really, really, really hard, because if it's 11 o'clock and you just got your kids to bed, well, hopefully got them to bed earlier, but maybe not, and then you're like, oh, okay, maybe I'll watch a bit of TV and go to sleep, and then you're like, fire, and you're like, I really wanted to go to sleep soon, and you're debugging and it's late and you're hoping that you're not going to be up all night. So this part is hard, but hopefully if we put enough processes in place and distribute enough knowledge to the team, so that when only fires that are really, really fires get to you and it's not some false alarms, that'll help with this. So that goes into planning. So for disaster planning, we want to document some sort of process that works for us, so that we can, protect our business infrastructure and make sure that we're handling things as best as we can during a disaster. And the most important thing here is you want to find a process that works for you and your team and your client, if you have a client, or your organization, or whatever. This is not a one-size-fits-all thing, but I'll give you an example of a process, parts of a process that might work. So, and this would be something that you would document and make available, like on an intranet, if you use Confluence, or if you have an internal intranet or whatever, a Google Doc, it doesn't really matter, as long as it's made available to the team so that the client or whoever owns that site can see this, as well as the internal developer team as well. So one of the things they might do is go check some other websites to make sure it's really the site in question. So I'm like, oh, example.com is down, and I'm contacting the developer team and going, emergency, and it's like, oh, well, if I go to Google, it's down too. I guess maybe that's my own site or my own hosting or my own infrastructure problem. So make sure it's really a problem for the site itself. Then have a list of status pages that we're going to go out and take a look at and make sure, so this is something you can actually give to the non-technical people. You can say, oh, go check these places and see if maybe there's something that's outside of our control that has a problem. There's a thing called a Traceroute. We'll go over that in a bit, but they could run a Traceroute. Then you could set up some sort of email alias that emails the team and say, okay, urgent, we've got a problem, and describe that. Another good thing is to have a calendar, especially around the holidays or times around DrupalCon when things, a lot of people won't be available, so that people know, oh, when it's that time, this is the order of people I'm going to be contacting. And then as far as how you contact people, that's usually personal preference, as long as it's documented. Personally, if I get a text, I don't get that many. I know that, oh, something funny's going on. So that's actually a good way if it's an emergency. I get lots of emails, so that's not necessarily the best way if it's an emergency. Call, maybe they should call me or whatever. And then, if you have a support system, internal ticketing system, which you should if you're doing a project, then, opening a ticket, and if there needs to be a follow-through, if it's not, a short-term thing. So you need to make sure that you're documenting all this and putting it someplace where everyone has access and it all makes sense to them. You need to also make sure that your team knows how to do what they need to do in the event of emergency. So you need documentation that's more focused on your dev team. Make sure that they can access all the things that they need to access. that they have access to any diagnostic tools that you have available, that they can open support tickets, because sometimes you'll have accounts where it's really, the account has been created by the client or a certain organization. There's one login, and sometimes there's tricky things if you're logging in as that, but you're a different person, then the support team doesn't want to deal with you and things like that. So make sure that they're able to do what they need to do to be successful. So if they need to deploy new code, in an emergency situation, they need to know how to do that. For example, on Pantheon, there's a special hotfix process if you already have sort of code that's ready in the kind of dev master environment that, you've been working on stuff and all of a sudden, there's a hotfix. There's a way of kind of circumventing master in order to get the hotfix out while not, disturbing your development workflow. You need to be able to access your backups, make sure you have backups, but access your backups, how they recover and so forth. So all of these things need to be well documented and easily accessible to the team, and review it with them, make sure they understand what's going on. Okay, we'll talk a bit about monitoring. So, for monitoring, we want to be able to verify that the site is working as expected. And there's lots of levels of monitoring you could do. You could go from super simple to more complex. So here are some popular tools for monitoring. And I'm personally have the most experience with Pingdom and New Relic. There are lots of tools available. Some of these tools have free levels. So if you need a tool but you're budget constrained and you just want some basic monitoring in place, then you still have options. And you can look at the different ones. I don't remember all of the ones that have the free ones, but quite a few of them do. So this particular example is Pingdom. And in Pingdom, you can set up what are called checks. And the check is basically going to go and hit your site or ping your site for those who are a little more on the developer side, which a lot of you were. So it's going to go and ping your site and try to find out if the page is coming back. So this is a very, very basic monitoring tool. I just want to go, in this case, hook42.com, that's our homepage. Is it okay? Is it coming back with a status 200? Or is it coming back with a 404? Or not a 404 probably, but a 504, what we were talking earlier. So there's some network problem. Or is it super, super slow and it's coming back? So you can configure all these checks, and you can have fancier checks, but the simplest one is basically just pinging a page. And then you can look at some of the reports it gives you and track things like uptime, over the last 3 months or 6 months or that kind of thing, and get a sense of the health of your site, which is great. You could also get alerts, which are good and bad. I do set up all my sites so that they send me alerts, which is really annoying when you're at DrupalCon and you're trying to enjoy yourself, and then you get alerts and you're like, what's going on? I don't want to fire right now. And then these are configurable. You can set any number of people to get them. You can get your alert by email or by text or various things. But I highly recommend that you do that so that it's in your face. You're not gonna. So all of these things, it's very important. Any kind of alert, any kind of monitoring stuff, you should really try to have things send you things when things are wrong, because are you really going to remember to go and log in there every day and make sure things are right? Of course, if the site's down, someone's going to probably tell you if you didn't already know. Okay. So there's some monitoring tools. There are also some diagnostic tools. So in terms of diagnostics, we want tools that allow us to look at the data, see what's going on, try to evaluate our software. And here are some options. Traceroutes, which I'll go into more detail. Status pages, which probably are pretty self-evident. The logs, and we'll go into different kinds of logs. Application performance management software, which is an awesome tool. We'll go a little bit more in detail on that. And there are Drupal modules we can use as well. So a trace route is basically a way to figure out how much time it takes to go from point A to point B. So you're in DrupalCon and your website's in New York, and you can do a trace route to that website, and it's going to give you some idea of how long it's taking to do that round trip time. So here's an example of a bad trace route. So there's a lot of gobbledygook and whatever, and it's not super important that you understand all of it, but it usually does 3 different tries, and that's why there tends to be 3 different columns. If you see an asterisk, you can usually pretty much ignore that. But what you're looking for are places where it's jumping hugely from one step to the next. So we're seeing in this example that once we get to these New York City edge area, all of a sudden our times have jumped a huge amount, and then they're even ever increasing after that. So when you see that kind of stuff, you're like, oh, well, what servers are those? Is that part of our network? Or is that our hosting? Or is that our CDN or what? And you can start pinpointing things. Usually I don't do anything with this information other than provide it to other people. I should have said before, I'm not a sysadmin. I'm an architect, a project manager, a developer. I could do system administration, basic stuff. I could do Ubuntu and all that, but that's not my goal. So I usually use this as something to provide to somebody else who is in charge of the networking and that kind of thing. So as far as status pages, what status pages you're checking really depends on what your site is set up, how your site is set up, right? Because if you're on Acquia, you're going one place. If you're on Pantheon, you're going somewhere else. So there's all sorts. You're going to want to check your hosting status page, any kind of CDN you're using, which I highly recommend using a CDN. There are ones that have a free level. So Cloudflare has a free level for CDN. That just helps, that gives an extra layer of caching, and also usually a bit of a firewall to try to keep the bad people out. So third-party services are going to have their own status page and so forth. So there's going to be a lot of different places, and so you just keep that in your documentation that you've got, oh, this status page, this one, this one, this one. And a lot of them look kind of similar because a lot of them use the same service to generate their status page. In this case, this is one from Acquia. They had some things going on, so it's one of the first things you're going to want to go do. Something's going on with the site. You're going to go in and look at all the status pages, and if there's an obvious culprit, great. It's not you. You didn't delete the code. You didn't, fat finger the live site. Someone else is having the problem, and then you will monitor that. Just because the status page says things are good does not mean it's not them. So that's the other very important thing to keep in mind. So, I'll have a problem that's hosting related, and I won't name names, but, I'll go on the status page. I'm like, I swear it's them. There's nothing there. I swear it's them. And then I'll open a support ticket, and sure enough, it's them, but the status page doesn't change. So don't completely trust it. I mean, definitely, if it's there, it's probably that, but if it's not there, it still might be that. The other thing you're going to want to look at are the logs, and where the logs live depend on the hosting. So I just gave 2 examples here. In Acquia, they have one set of logs that look a bit like that because they're on, I believe they're still on Apache, and then Pantheon is on Nginx, so it looks a little bit different. So you just need to, document, okay, where do I get to the logs? And then usually if you look at the logs, you tail the end of it. It's pretty obvious if something really bad is happening because you'll see it there. So you can also check the Drupal logs. Not always, actually, if the site's super hard down, like you can't even get in there. So you would want to do the server logs in that case. But sometimes you can get in and see the Drupal logs, see what's going on. The first one noted is the database logging module. That's a core module, and you can turn that on. There's some performance things with that. So if there's any way to not use that and use something else, syslog or something different, it's actually better in terms of performance, but sometimes your hosting environment doesn't let you do that in an easy way, and so you're more constrained. So, that's core option, and there's lots of other ways that you can log. And so it really depends on your site and how you've set it up. But, so where you're going to go and look for those Drupal logs just depends on how you have set up the site. Now we'll talk a little bit about application performance management. There are a lot of tools, again, that you can use. I am most familiar with New Relic, but there's a lot of different ones, and some of them do have a free tier. And there are some hosting companies that partner with some of these so that you can actually have some of that as part of your hosting package, which is a big value add. So keep that in mind if you are shopping for hosting, that if they have that availability, that's really great. So here's an example from New Relic, and you can, so in this case, I was looking in the 24-hour range. Something had gone wacky on the site. We had gotten a few errors. We were wondering what was going on, and then, later in the day, we were trying to analyze and see what happened, and you can see that, okay, there was some sort of spike of stuff going on, and you could see the throughput. Oh, okay, so there's a lot more processing happening during that time, and then you can start looking at other things to try to figure out what was happening there. I believe in this case it was someone had decided to go run some process, some sort of admin script right in the middle of the day. It was using too much resources, and that was not a good idea. So then it's education, like, yeah, okay, if we really need to run that, maybe we run it overnight or some other time. So you can look at, the PHP times, you can look at the database, you can actually analyze how long things take, throughput, and start looking at, slow queries and things like that. Super helpful. So before I get to some of the Drupal modules that can help diagnose this, I'm going to open it back up to keep everybody awake here. So any modules that you like to use to help diagnose problems on your site?
So this isn't quite a new module, but we were talking just now about New Relic. One of the things that I had amazing luck with, or amazing benefit with diagnosing was using New Relic to identify which views in particular are causing the slowness and trying different caching techniques to see what's going on.
Okay, great. Yeah, so one technique it's not a Drupal module specifically, but a technique is to drill down more into New Relic to look at specific views. So actually New Relic has Drupal support. It understands some Drupal things. So you can actually look at specific views, certain modules that are heavier, and that is really great. The other thing is you are able to write a little bit of custom code if you're a developer, and a lot of you were or are. So you can write a little bit of custom code and add some extra stuff to New Relic to track, which is really nice. So things that we've added are, for example, the user ID in case they're logged in, because we have like a lot of admin pages and a lot of heavy pages that do a lot of crunching, and those are supposed to only be used at certain times or whatever, and so we'll monitor that and we'll say, oh, so-and-so was hitting this page, and well, maybe we need to make that page better for them because now they're hitting it a lot more than we thought they were going to. Or maybe we need to tell them, you know what, that's some reporting stuff. Why don't you go over and do that on the test site or another environment, because you're just trying to grab some analytics. And you don't really need the real-time site in order to do that. We're going to do it over in this other place. So there are ways that you can, so we've added like the user's role and the user ID and a few other things to enhance that experience. Any Drupal modules that people like to use for diagnosing? All right, I'll go over some. So the blame module is one that we've used before, and blame is interesting. What it does is it will track forms on your site and changes that people are making to the forms. So if you don't want someone to change a view on the live site, which they shouldn't be doing, you could track that if you wanted. Another way to track that would be to use the features module, which is what you should really do for configuration in order to make sure that people aren't doing things on live. So the blame module, you can set it up per form and say, I only want to track these particular forms. Maybe the permissions page might be a great form to check to make sure that people aren't messing. Again, you could put the permissions and features, so you could do that as well. The hacked module. So hacked is a module that lets you check to see if your code has been modified compared to what is on Drupal.org. So you'll check core, and it'll also check contrib modules. So if you need to change one of those things, if you need to change code in core or contrib because there's some patch that you need to apply, you should be tracking that, keeping that somewhere safe. Usually we keep a special directory where we have patches, we have a README file, and we keep it all really tidy so we know that we did that. You should never change that code without tracking it, and be very careful about making changes to those. I mean, ideally, you're only grabbing patches that are from Drupal.org. Sometimes we will make our own custom patches because there's some weird behavior, we can't really analyze it. We'll add a little bit of watchdog logging in certain places, like if a certain condition happens, we'll add a little thing. So, we'll add a 3-line patch, we'll put it in our patches, put it in the README, and so that we can track it. But the hack module would see, there's some code here that's not part of core, not part of this contrib module. So that's a good one. The security review module will check to look for security problems. You should also be checking your status page on the site as well in the Drupal, the reports to see if there are any security updates. So I really like this one, logging and alerts. I use the email log part, so there's some submodules in this project. This is a contrib module, and I get emailed every error. So Drupal's funny, there's emergency, urgent, critical, I don't remember, critical error warning. So there's like these top 4, which, what's the difference between critical and error and whatever? But so there's different levels. I just get emailed all of the ones that are basically error and above. And so it's really in my face, which is good and bad. It's like, whoa, why am I getting all these errors? But it kind of forces you to go in and deal with them. Whereas if you're like, yeah, I'm going to go in and check the errors. Oh, shoot, I forgot to do that yesterday. Well, I'm going to go get a coffee, go chat with my friend. So if they're getting emailed to you, it's like really, in your face. So I personally like that. Okay, so that was a bit about diagnostics, and now we'll talk a little bit about support. So tech support, kind of a dirty word, I think, but basically you want to have assistance to deal with your software, your technical product. And inevitably, you're going to be opening support tickets. Almost always, at least every few months, you're going to be opening some sort of support ticket. So the important thing here, these are support tickets for external vendors, your hosting, your CDN, or your third-party services. First, try to make sure it's not you, right? So was it really something else? And just do your due diligence there. Look at New Relic. Or was it some crazy query I was running? Was so-and-so running this big cron job? Any of that kind of stuff. Try to make sure it's not, something application-specific first before you go and open that ticket. And then you need to know where to open the tickets. And this isn't always obvious, especially if you have a CDN and hosting. It's not necessarily obvious where you open the ticket, because often they'll point the blame at each other. Oh yeah, that's the CDN problem. Oh no, that's the hosting problem. So usually what I'll do is I'll open the hosting ticket first, and occasionally if it's bad enough, I'll open it both at the same time, because I'm like, oh, this is hard down. I don't see any problem with our stuff. And I'll just open both and be like, okay, someone's going to go and look at this as fast as possible. So that tends to be a good tactic. And some tech support will have 2 levels of tickets. They'll have just the regular ticket, I need some help, I have a question, and that, oh, this is really bad, this is an emergency. Not all tech support does, but some of them do, so just keep that in mind when you're opening the ticket, that you know which kind of ticket to open. I'm usually very polite. I am typically a very polite person, but sometimes in the heat of the moment, My kids will tell you that I'm not necessarily the most polite person. So sometimes you have to take a deep breath and you're like, everything's melting. And then you're kind of like, fix it, right? So, try to be polite with them, and they're more likely to help you. And to also thank them for the help that they do provide. So it's really important, just like if you're opening an issue on Drupal.org, it's not like, oh, this is broken. It doesn't work. Well, what? That didn't help me, right? So you need to give them as much information as you can. Give them the trace routes. Explain where I went to the home page, I got this error, or it's the site's sluggish, it takes this long. Whatever you can, that's super helpful for them. Maybe you would only go to one part of the site and you have problems, or whatever. If you have access to New Relic or something similar, and the hosting company also has access to that, I will actually link out to certain things and go, this looks weird, and this is not us. This looks like a network error, so please go and take a look at this. So, common sense, but it makes just things go so much faster. All right. Now we'll talk a bit about recovery, because, you're going to have a problem at some point. So, recovery, we need to, enable our site to work again after some sort of disaster. And how do you recover? Unfortunately, it depends, right? Because we listed that big laundry list of all sorts of things that can go wrong, and we didn't even list everything, right? Because there's so many things that could go wrong. We had this weird case where we have this mail system, and it's kind of like Facebook, where you can email people back and forth through your mail client, but then it's routed through Facebook, so it shows up or whatever. Or like eBay does that. And the email just stopped. It was broken. Everything was clogged up, and we're like, what's going on? It turned out to be an emoji. An emoji broke the email system, and it was because Drupal didn't support was a 4-byte emoji got a PDO exception, which was something that someone mentioned earlier, which was interesting. So the email came inbound from someone's mail client. They put in this cute little smiley, and it got into Drupal. Unfortunately, at the time, we weren't handling that exception properly. So it tried to write to the database. The database blew up, and then it went back and it talked back to the mail server and says, something's wrong. Well, then it kept trying, and it just it just clogged the whole thing. And, it took us a little time to figure out what's going on. What is going on here? So do you expect an emoji to break your website? No, not really, right? And we didn't even realize that Drupal at the time was not supporting it. Actually, still doesn't support it. Something to keep in mind. I think they have patched that for Drupal 8, I believe. But for Drupal 7, there's still some workarounds for that. So the upshot is it depends. If it's hackers and you've identified based on, there's been a traffic spike, it's like the same IP keeps hitting the site, you can tell that, then, an obvious thing, you could block IPs. Unfortunately, they might change the IP. So yes, you could do some short-term things. For this one, I highly recommend a CDN. Cloudflare is great at, and maybe others like Fastly, I don't know as much about them, but they are also an application firewall where they will try to keep out those bad folks. So they'll monitor things much better than we can, and then they can just do the job. Sometimes you'll still get some, leak through. Sometimes it's just like one person. And it's not even, it's not a software. It's just one person trying to be really annoying and try to get in, and then you can block those manually. Well, if it's, hosting or the CDN or some other thing, there's not really much you could do other than open the support tickets. So we go through the process and monitor those, and hopefully they'll fix it as fast as possible. Well, if you screwed up the code or the configuration or that kind of thing, then ideally you can update the code or update the configuration, get back to where you were without too much difficulty. And then you might have to go through this hotfix process depending on where the rest of your code is in your workflow. And that's why you need to make sure that's well documented. Sometimes things are just foobar in the original definition. And I won't say exactly, but basically pretty messed up. So then at that point, there's not much else you can do. You have to recover from your backups. Knock wood, this is not, I don't think that's wood, but I haven't had to do this on a major site. I mean, I've done it on little sites. It was not a big deal. We had backups and stuff. I had to do it on a major site. But if you don't have the backups, then that's kind of a problem. And I was in the situation where I'd given someone, this task of moving my old site, Kristen.org, which I haven't touched in like years, unfortunately. But I'm like, oh yeah, why don't you just move this from this hosting company to this other hosting company? And because we were trying to clean up, and I figure it was a good learning experience. Go ahead and move this from that. And then I get this chat, do you have backup of that? I'm like, well, why? Well, I deleted all the code. I'm like, alrighty then. Fortunately, I did have, it was a site that I hadn't touched for a long time, but I had some backup squirreled away somewhere, and it was fine. But I was like, oh yeah, maybe I should make daily backups of that, or monthly, yearly, I don't know, something. So you need the backups in order to recover. It's super important, and people need to have access to those backups and know how to restore them. This is another plug for using managed hosting, where it's all just kind of done for you. It's awesome when it's just like you don't even have to think about it. It's like you can't even disable it. It's just like backups just happen. So ideally, you want to try to prevent some things. That would be good. You're not going to be able to prevent the hosting having problems or the CDN having problems or some third party having problems, but you can try to prevent some of these disasters. So some things, actually I just mentioned it. So managed hosting, that is super important if you can afford it. And unfortunately, we get some nonprofits that work with us sometimes, and they just have no money. They just have no money, and the thing is, it's actually more expensive to have the developers going in and doing your system administration, and to go in and dealing with those backups that didn't happen, or trying to recover or move code around and it costs money to pay people to do this stuff. So if it's, in the end, it's really cheaper to do managed hosting. It's just that people don't see it that way. So I'm a big fan of managed hosting. Make sure your backups are working. Use a code repository. If you're using managed hosting, you'll be using a code repository because it's all built in. But if you're going to roll your own, then you still need to do that. Most people use Git these days, but whatever. I mean, just use something so that you can go and see the history of people checking stuff in and make sure that something bad didn't happen. You're going to want to track and tag releases. So even if it's something small, you're going to want to make sure that you tag the code and say, okay, here's this release, this is rolling out. If it's a managed hosting, that's usually done for you as you push stuff along, but if you're not, then you're going to tag it yourself. And another thing, if you are using New Relic or some tool like that, you can also notify that tool saying, oh, I've just done a deployment, and then you'll get a little line in New Relic and a little log, and it'll say, okay, I've just deployed this. This is great because then you can see, oh, wait, pages have gotten slower in the last week or two, and like, oh, that's right, we pushed out this one little fix, 2 weeks ago or whatever, and oh yeah, the timing aligns. I bet you there was something that happened in there, and then you can go back and look at your tag and say, oh, well, what did we add, and narrow things down. Very important to have some sort of workflow for your development, dev test live, ideally. Sometimes people don't have that, but at least a dev and a live, and this is not local to live, ideally, right? You have an other environment besides live that the client or the organization, someone who is invested in that site can go in and do QA, and that's before you're pushing it out. Test and backup before you do live. And then personally, I like to look at New Relic, usually weekly, just to kind of get my pulse on, like, oh, is anything interesting? Because I have alerts, but it's not like I can set up alert for any kind of possible weird thing. So I'll just click around and look for any kind of spikes and kind of drill down and see if there's anything strange going on, and that's super helpful. And then, and similarly, and this goes along with either Pingdom or New Relic or something like along those lines, is just looking at your load times in general to see if there's any kind of, maybe you're not noticing it because you're looking too closely, but if you were to expand out and look over a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, are you seeing that, your trend of your speed is going up? Then you're like, oh, maybe we just keep adding more features, and you're just starting to, your site's getting a little unmanageable. So, you could take that back to whoever's in charge and say, look, we're adding, we need to spend some time doing some performance enhancement, maybe some of these features you don't need anymore, and that kind of thing. Some other things you can do, configure caching. Out of the box in Drupal 7, caching is not enabled. In Drupal 8, it is out of the box enabled. So you'll have to go in, if you're using Drupal 7, and manually do that. And then there's other things like Varnish and the CDN or whatever you can use as well. Something that I've run into, which you might not think of, but we write a lot of cron code. Cron is something that, code that you're going to run periodically. And so for that, you just need to be careful because they can be very heavy. And if you have a lot of cron code crunching stuff while other people are on the site, you could have an impact. So just monitor those and you can spread them out. There's something called Elysia cron, which can help you so that you can spread it out throughout the day or put them maybe in during slow times during the day or night for your site. So this is hard. This is a hard one. I have found that I can't seem to get my modules down to like under 150 modules once I include like feature modules and core modules and all that. We build complex sites, and it's this constant struggle. Oh, we want this feature. Oh, well, there's a module that does that, of course. So do you really want that feature? Are you sure you really, really want that feature? Okay, well, I guess we'll add that feature. And then, but the thing about that is you need to be constantly checking in and saying, well, do we still need that? 6 months from now, are we still using that feature, or can I actually get rid of it now? And be careful how you uninstall modules. So update things regularly, make sure you're on top of it. Definitely your security patches, but even your just regular updates, make sure you're keeping on top of those. You kind of think, well, it's just a regular update. Things are working. I don't need to worry about it. But what happens is sometimes there'll be another update. If you wait too long, sometimes really wacky things will happen, and it just doesn't update seamlessly because there's this interaction between different modules, right? And so if you waited, a year to update a module, and there's been like 10 releases in between, and the same for some other module, there may have been some interplay that you're not aware of, and things can get weird. So proactively fixing errors in the log. So if you're getting those emails saying, fix me, fix me, fix me, you're more inclined to try to fix it because it gets rather annoying to have those emails. Something that we've done is try to auto-block IP addresses, and we wrote a little bit of code. We're considering maybe we'll try to generalize it and have it as a contrib module, but the idea is if someone keeps hitting getting a 404 a lot or a 403 a lot, it's questionable, like what are they doing? So we wrote a little bit of code that it keeps a count of those, and after a certain amount of time, it just keeps the information in the database, and after a certain number of times of those, it will actually just auto-block them. It sends us an email so we can go and take a look. Typically, it will check the IP address, and it'll be like, oh, it's something from some random country that shouldn't be looking at the site anyway, so it's like, oh yeah, that looks fine. But we'll also log if they're logged in, actually we let it go because we have certain users that it's fine. But then we can say, oh, at least we can contact them and see what's going on. So that's been pretty helpful. Peer review code. If you have a peer, ideally, Sometimes you have to put a duck on the desk and talk to the duck or sometimes I'll talk, so if it's late at night and my husband's around, he codes, but he's a physicist, but I'll actually walk through the problem with him, even though he doesn't necessarily know all the stuff I'm talking about, and just verbalizing that, it can a lot of times be a really great tool to try to work through a problem. And sometimes he'll just be like, well, what about blah? I'm like, oh, okay, and go and look, and it's like, oh, yeah, that's great. So that's not necessarily code, but ideas, brainstorming, trying to figure out why are you having issues and that kind of stuff. And the last big one I have is limiting access. So this is a big one. We've had rescue sites where we got the code and everyone has full administration rights. People that don't know anything about Drupal. They could edit views, they can do permissions, they could add users. They haven't a clue, and they just got everything. And then you're going to get a lot of problems. So that one's super important. Always make sure you have, you don't have to go crazy with roles. Sometimes people go a little overboard, but ideally, the administrator role should be for Drupal developers, period. People really need to understand Drupal. And even then, even if you have a lot of Drupal developers, maybe you pare that down. And we haven't usually had to do that, but that's a possibility. Then you might have a content manager or content editor role, and they have certain access, and maybe there's someone who can add. So maybe there's an admin on their side, but like they can add a user or they can do certain things that are more limited. So that one's super helpful. So on that note, I'm going to open it up to questions. There's a microphone here, or if you throw out a question, I'll repeat it. I know it's like this is the last slot of last day, so people are like, yeah, I was at Pantheon all night. I'm totally toasted. But if you have any questions, we'll open it up.
Thanks for all this. Two things I'd like to just say, actually working in a support organization is you originally said that great list of things to provide in a support ticket. It's also really helpful that you can say that we tried this from multiple locations, we tried this with multiple people.
Yes.
So more information we can get about what you've done to diagnose it.
Mm-hmm.
Specific URL and specific information is great.
Yep.
And then one thing about the last slide, the peer review, it's a great opportunity to get involved in your local Drupal meetups. Bring your code and show it off, and people love to sit around and talk about that. It's a great thing to meet up for that too.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea. I hadn't thought about specifically saying, oh, here's something I've been working on code-wise, and then just showing it to the team there, or the people there. And
yeah, especially if you are stuck and don't have somebody to bounce it off.
yeah, so yeah, use your local user groups as best you can. If you don't have one, start one. You just need 2 people, right? Meet at a cafe if need be or whatever. But yeah, that's great. The location-based one is also great. Fortunately, on our team, we usually have people from around the world. So we'll be like, hey, is this site down for anyone else? Oh yeah, it's down for me. Oh yeah, down for me. Okay, right, then let's get on it. Sometimes it will be location-based. So Cloudflare, we had some problems a couple of years ago where continually they seemed to have an issue just in the San Jose area, which was kind of annoying. And so we were having problems, and actually the company was based in San Jose, or Mountain View, close by. And so all the rest of the world were hunky-dory and having a good time, and the kind of core folks couldn't use the site. So that's a huge, huge thing. Any other questions?
Could you please put up the application performance management slide with all those things?
Yeah, sure. With the APM? Yeah, let me jump out of that. Probably faster. There's a lot of slides. APM. Oh, and it's so small. This one? There we go. Mm-hmm. So, and these slides, we'll put them up on the session page in a little bit.
Not a question, but earlier you were asking about the Drupal module. Backup migrate is probably a good one.
Yeah, I should throw that one in there.
We do it with a script, but if you want a module that'll do it for you, that'll
Save your bacon. Yeah, in fact, that's a very good point. So I should add that to the slides. The backup and migrate module. Someone remind me to add that to the slides after, okay, before I post them. Backup and migrate is great, and it's funny because there was a client recently, and they're like, oh, the site's, down, oh, we're having all these problems. I took a look, it was a Drupal 6 site. And I was like, ooh, sorry, looks like you've been hacked. Poked around, I was like, oh, this doesn't look good. And they didn't have a lot of money, and they were like, oh, okay. And I said, well, I mean, you could back up from backups. They said, where are your backups? This was not a site that we had. We did another site for them, and this was kind of some other side thing of theirs. They're like, oh, backups? And they went and checked with the hosting company, which was, I don't even know what hosting, some random hosting company. And they're like, oh, the hosting company didn't set up backups. And I'm like, okay. But then I was like, oh. I went and looked in the files directory, and sure enough, backup and migrate had been set up, so someone did the right thing. But they didn't even realize that they had used that and they had backups. And I was like, oh, look, you've got backups, awesome. And they're like, yay. But then they decided it was going to be too much money to sink into this thing because they weren't going to update all the module. They were just woefully out. It was Drupal 6 out of date, and they just said, okay, they just shelved the whole thing at that point. But they did have backups. Yeah.
With very accurate, good database backups that then when they brought them back into the code, they had a lot of trouble.
That is a really good point. Yeah. So just because you weren't at the mic, but make sure that the database backups are actually valid, that you could actually restore the site from those. And it's my business partner.
Hi, yeah, extending on that topic, you'll document emergency recovery procedures and you don't actually do them all the time. And also, so we actually go through a refresher, and especially for some of our big clients, it's like, wow, we haven't touched that feature just because it keeps running. But like to actually recover it or handle it in an emergency situation takes some time. So we actually do refresh the team, and especially over the holidays, as we kind of trim down our team for the holidays, we do review these things, and it does require practice. And then sometimes infrastructure changes, and you're like, what's going on? Like, ah.
Yeah. So one way to check those would be just to grab it, install on your local, click around, make sure it seems right, or if you have any automated tests, which would be amazing, then you can run those.
Along with backup and migrate, the node squirrel is a great offsite backup service that's free and integrates with backup and migrate. So if you have a schedule, it'll backup everything offsite.
Right, so the service that's free is Node Squirrel, and somebody took that over. Was it Pantheon? Okay, so Pantheon bought them out. So Node Squirrel, free service. It leverages the backup and migrate module in order to do that. So there's really absolutely no excuse not to have backups. No matter what your hosting is, you can set it up, and it's free and good. Any other questions or tools, tricks? Everyone's up.
And one more thing, you mentioned checking from various locations. I don't have it on me, I don't know what the URL is. There's a website I use whenever someone asks about it working, where it actually pings from all over the world in various locations. You can check boxes to try and it'll tell you, like, yes, it's working, or no.
Yeah, so I've used, actually I do it for load time, but there's the web pagetest.org, which that's really meant for load time, but you can use it just by checking from different locations, and then, well, you'll know if it's not loading. It's pretty obvious, but yeah, sure what other ones.
I don't remember the name, but we use another one to check when we're developing like GeoIP, like web browsing, so you can hit it as you were in Japan.
Yeah, and a lot of the monitoring tools will let you hit from different places. Pingdom, you can check certain locations. New Relic, you can as well. The New Relic does have a monitoring piece that you can use. There's a free part where you can check some different locations and have it hit it as well. I imagine that these other ones do. but yeah, that's a good one, especially, I mean, if you have an international audience, then it would make sense to at least ping it from, a few different spots.
Yeah, we also you can purchase like a VPN, like a static VPN service that is hosted in different countries too, so you can just connect and exist as you were in another country.
Okay, so any other tips or questions or anything? Yeah.
For this for anyone who either works for a nonprofit or works with nonprofit clients, New Relic will make their APM available for free to nonprofits.
Okay, so that's awesome to know. So nonprofits, you can get New Relic for free, and that's New Relic Pro?
Yeah, the APM, yeah.
Okay, so the different things about New Relic, there's different layers, different levels that you can do, and there's a free one, which you only get like a day of data or something, which is good. I mean, if you're having a problem and you go looking right now, it's good. But we use New Relic Pro, which is a longer term thing where you get data for a long time. And it was just mentioned that if you're a nonprofit, then you have access to that for free, which is amazing. All right, so I think we're pretty much done here. If you're around tomorrow, please come to the sprints. So a sprint is we're going to get together. We're going to try to make Drupal better. You don't have to be a coder to do that. Anyone can help out. So that's really good. And if you could evaluate the talk, you just go to the session page, and there's a link there to go ahead and do that. And that's it. Thank you for your time. It went really well.
Right next door is the state of Drupal retreats in Denver. So they're just finishing that.
Hey guys.
Hi.
Hi.
Joe, Kristen.
Thanks.
Before we move on and answer your questions,
What do you know what the